Right now in the preparedness community, we know one of the biggest threats we can suffer from here in the United States is going to be cyber attacks, and they're going to be in response to any retaliation made by the United States or any of its allies. So let's talk about what the most common types of attacks are, just so you're aware of how they originate, and then let's talk about what the most likely targets will be and what you can do to prepare yourself for them. Hey everybody, it's Magic Prepper. Let's talk about what cyber attacks are most likely in the sense of consequences coming from any reactions to what's happening overseas right now. This is something we should be paying attention to because these cyber attacks could actually affect both you and I here in the United States as well as in other parts of the world. So we have to definitely stay ahead of this whole situation to make sure that we're as least affected by it as possible. And if you're preparing for what's going on around the world right now and you're concerned about all the things that are happening, then hit the subscribe button below because hopefully these conversations not only help you prepare for what could be coming, but it also gives you peace of mind knowing you've done what you can to be as strong against these situations as possible. So, first and foremost, the most common types of cyber attacks that we're going to see are denial of service attacks, which is basically where you flood servers with a bunch of requests to the point where they crash. And this is very layman's terms. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of cybersecurity with you all because it's not that important, but I'm just giving you a quick rundown. And the other most common types of attacks we've seen previously, which could easily be leveraged here again, is going to be ransomware attacks, where data is either blocked or possibly threatened to be publicized, and you don't get access to it, or it will be published if you don't pay the ransom. Something along those lines, okay? So those are very common types of cyber attacks, and they're definitely ones we could see here in the very near future. Now, what are the most likely targets? And this is something that we definitely need to prepare for. So, first and foremost, the most likely targets are going to start with financial institutions, okay, and banks. And this is being talked about right now via the FBI and the government, and everyone else is saying that banks and financial institutions are likely to be targeted if these cyber attacks actually occur. So in that situation, what do you do against that? Because we're not here to talk about how to strengthen our own cybersecurity. We're here to talk about what we can do in preparation for these institutions to be affected by a breach of some kind. So the best thing to do in this situation is to avoid the all your eggs in one basket scenario. Spread your wealth out into different institutions or have physical assets on hand and do what you can to have as much access to your money and your finances as possible right now. Having everything in one singular bank account right this second is probably not the best idea. And I am not a financial advisor, so I'm not telling you to pull out your 401k or do anything crazy like that. What I'm trying to say is that just make sure you have different assets in different locations so that something can't be completely taken away from you if something was to fail. This is definitely something we should be practicing anyway, but right now on this heightened alert we should all be on, this is going to be very important. So make sure financially you have different resources that you can access in different ways, whether or not it's digital or physical, and make sure that you can do what you need to do when it comes to accessing those assets, okay? So, moving on from there. The next big thing that could easily be targeted and is likely to be targeted is going to be critical infrastructure. And we've all seen it happen time and time again. It has, the grid is definitely a target. And then we've seen things like the Colonial Pipeline, and we saw things regarding like the water treatment plant in Florida back when they tried to make the water non-potable for people. There's a lot of different things that could happen in regards to a infrastructure attack. And we know how vulnerable our grid really is to these types of attacks. What can you do to prepare for that? Well, have backup power options, obviously, if you're talking about a grid down blackout scenario. Also, make sure you have fuel and water options as well, because any of those style of attacks could limit your access to those items. Water is huge, you gotta have it. Fuel is something you're probably going to want, and power is something you don't need necessarily, but will definitely be helpful in the sense of survival. So make sure you have access to at least those three resources in alternate fashions besides from what you rely on directly from the grid right now. And I did get an email today that I did want to share with you all really quickly here, but basically Mira Safety reached out to me with everything going on right now. They just said, hey, look, sales are through the roof. There's a spike in demand for personal protective equipment, especially in relation to CBRN protective equipment, which is what Mira Safety specializes in. So I put a link in the description as well as in the pinned comment if you want to jump on their website and get some things now in order to protect yourself from any possible nuclear threats or anything like that. Now's probably the best time to do it because these prices are going to go up and the supply is going to dwindle based on the fact that demand just suddenly shot through the roof. So I thought I'd share that with you all because I still think it's important stuff to have, and whether or not a nuclear event is on the horizon doesn't make a difference. If you don't have access to this gear now, there's a possibility down the road you might not have access to it again. So I wanted to share that with you and give you the opportunity to at least act now instead of waiting till later, just because it's something that they brought to my attention directly and I thought was at least a little bit interesting. Now, another reason why I just brought that up, and another critical part of our livelihoods that could be attacked by a cyber attack, is going to be our emergency response system, okay? Emergency services could easily go down, and we all know that most people's #1 plan for any type of emergency, whether or not is like a home break-in or if it's an injury or anything along those lines, a fire, is going to be to call 911. These emergency services can be shut down just like anything else related to these cyber attacks and critical infrastructure situations. So be your own first responder and have network with your community, and that's the best way you can try to hedge yourself against the situation. If emergency services go down, you're going to have to be your own fireman, your own EMT, and your own policeman, and you should probably have a network put together with your neighbors and your community so that if this happens, everyone knows who to call, or at least they have someone to reach out to via possibly even radio or something along those lines, based on the fact that comms could go down as well, and that you have a reason or an ability to call somebody in case you need help. So these are things you should be putting into place now and should have access to at this moment, based on the fact that these services could be targeted very easily. Another thing to keep in mind when it comes to these cyber attacks and what's likely to be attacked in one way or another, and this is an attack that could be a little bit less structured, but definitely has the capability to change the narrative and change people's opinions, which could definitely be a big part of winning any conflict, which is going to be social media. Understand that social media is already under attack, it always has been, but in different formats than just being hacked, right? So basically, expect more censorship and propaganda on all social media, and there could be possible outages as well. And basically what we could see is that with these Russian troll farms and everything else that we know exists out there being a big part of what happens on social media, essentially in the spread of misinformation, well, that crackdown could be coming very soon here. In order to actually get rid of all of these different bots and trolls and everything else that exists within social media, there could be significant portions of time where service would be interrupted. So I wanted you to be aware of that as well, and there's going to be a lot of misinformation, propaganda, and a lot of other stuff going on social media that we have to keep our eyes on, because there's going to be a lot of look over here instead of over here going on during these times, and you should definitely be aware of that. Social media right now, the best thing about it is to be able to network and communicate with the people in your community. So that's what we have to keep doing to the best of our ability. However, at some point in time, this whole thing could crash down for all we know. Moving on from there, the last thing that is most likely and definitely something you should be aware of, and I'm not going to dive into every single possible situation, but these are the things I thought could affect you directly the most out of anything else that could be going on. Because let's be honest, if the Department of Defense gets hacked in a cyber attack, what does that really do to you and I besides, weaken our national security? It doesn't really hurt us directly in the time being. It might have long-term consequences, but that's not what we're talking about here. So the last thing on this list is actually going to be your online retailers. Understand that places like Amazon have suffered these giant denial of service attacks many times over, and most of the time they're able to overcome them due to having a huge infrastructure put into place in order to combat these cybersecurity breaches. However, just expect these online retailers to see service disruptions, okay? Order what you need now, expect delays, and expect service interruptions to the point where you might want to move a lot of your purchasing over to brick and mortar. Let's be honest, first off, that supports your local community most of the time, but second off, you know you have the items that you need in hand and on your person at that moment, rather than hoping the logistics system doesn't suddenly go down during this conflict. And with everything going on in the world, not just what's happening overseas, the supply chain is very fragile. So expecting to receive every single thing you buy off the internet right now is a little bit naive. So you might pay more in person, but you'll actually have it These are things to keep in mind right this second. And obviously there are things on the internet that you have to order that you can't just go to the store and get, but those are things you should be looking into now, and your expectation of success in receiving those items should be lowered. These are things I definitely wanted to bring to your attention and to give you an overview of what I'd be looking out for during these times. Look, you don't have to know cybersecurity in order to prepare for what these certain breaches or attacks could cause in your life. These are just things that we should be very aware of, and right this second, just based on what's going on in the world, I think these are probably the most likely things to affect us directly, more so than anything else related to this conflict, at least for now. So, if you have any questions or you have anything else to add to this, leave it in the comments below. I know there's a bunch of IT and software tech people in this community that have a lot more information and knowledge about this subject than I do. I'm just trying my best to help people take layman's terms and turn them into actual preparedness. But if you have good information to share that can help people have a better understanding as to what could occur, please share it, because we're all here to learn, and I'm not going to claim to be an expert on something that I'm just not an expert on. Either way, these are troubled times. We have to do our best to stay ahead of what's happening and do our best to prepare and do our best to help each other out. So make sure you're still helping each other. If you need anything else from me, magicprepper.com is a good place to go, unless it suddenly goes down due to denial of service cyber attacks, which, I don't know, maybe I would even be a little flattered if that happened. But either way, that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.